Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers that cover the NFL on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your host, Erin Summers.
Happy Black and Gold Friday and welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. I'm Erin Summers. The Saints wrapped up their practices Friday ahead of this weekend's game against the Dallas Cowboys. They'll have a walkthrough Saturday before they head to Texas to take on Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. Dak just signed that huge new contract. He has them playing so well, especially there in Dallas. They have won 16 straight games at home during the regular season. And under Prescott, in those games, they have scored an average of 35 points. So the Saints are going to have to find a way to slow down the Cowboys and limit what Dak Prescott does well. And one of those things that he does well is find wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. Here's head coach Dennis Allen on Prescott.
I've watched a lot of tape on him, not just this week, but over the course of his career, and I just see him getting better and better every year. I think his poise in the pocket is outstanding. His accuracy under duress is pretty unique. So I just see a guy that's continued to grow. He's certainly got command of the offense. You see a very confident player. And he's played at a high level, so he should be confident.
And how the Cowboys utilize Lamb in several different ways.
And look, and I would say it's probably not unique to them. I mean, I think, some teams do it more than others in terms of just moving their guys around. I think they do a good job of putting him in positions to feature him, putting him in positions to get him the ball. You certainly can see that on the tape, how they're, game planning touches for him. And so, look, we'll have to see how they're using them, where they're putting them, and, how we can counteract that.
Talking to defensive end Carl Granderson after practice on Friday, he said there are a few things that the team has to key in on in order to have success against Prescott.
Yeah, we just managed to keep them first. We got to stop the run, and then everything else going to take care of itself. We got some good guys up front, me, Sept, we got Brazil, Cam Jordan, Chase Young. So we got some guys that could get after it. So we just got to work together as a team, and everything else going to take care of itself.
How hard is it to speed up somebody that has as much poise as Dak does in his decision-making?
He's a good quarterback. We're going to start off right there. You got to give credit where credit due at. Good quarterback, been around for a long time. So, he knows his game plan really well. So we got to know our stuff too. So it's going to be hard, but like I said, we got to just go out there with the mindset to stop the run and then just keep them in the pocket and then put some pressure on them.
As far as the injury report goes for that game against the Cowboys, the Saints have listed 2 players out in linebacker DeMarco Jackson and defensive tackle Colin Saunders. We've been watching a couple other positions throughout the week, and left tackle Taliese Fuaga, who did not practice again on Friday. So that's 2 straight days that he has missed practice. He's listed as questionable with that back injury, dealing with some tightness there. And then cornerback Marshon Lattimore didn't practice at all this week. He's also listed as questionable. Defensive tackle Brian Brzee was added to the injury report Friday with an illness. He's listed as questionable. Defensive end Isaiah Foskey also did not practice Friday, questionable with back for Sunday's game. And then Jalen Ford, he's been a limited participant throughout the week. He's coming back from a hamstring injury, and he is listed as questionable as well. Obviously, the areas to watch there are at left tackle. If Tolly can't go, then it will be Landon Young, who does fill in his spot. And then at cornerback, it looks like it'll be Kool-Aid McKinstry, who slides in for Marshon Lattimore. For today's podcast guest, I caught up with Ed Werder, who is working for WFAA in Dallas, covering the Cowboys now. He spent a very long time in Dallas covering the Cowboys and the greater NFL for ESPN prior to this, so he definitely knows what he's talking about. He's going to give us a scoop on this weekend's opponent. Ed, thank you so much for joining me on the New Orleans Saints podcast. I appreciate you coming into enemy territory, quote unquote, ahead of this big game on Sunday. How are you?
I'm good, and I always love to cover games involving the Saints. Trips to New Orleans over the course of my career have been some of the most memorable that I've enjoyed in, I guess, nearly 40 years of covering the NFL. When Sean Payton was there and Kenny Chesney had his little place outside the locker room, it was an awesome experience.
I'm sure you have stories that you could tell for days about the Saints organization and things that happened here. From game one, week one, what did you see from the Saints that looks a little different than what we've had over the past couple years since Sean Payton left?
Yeah, it's interesting that Dennis Allen has hired Clint Kubiak to install what's called the Mike Shanahan offense, which has produced great results in Green Bay and San Francisco, two of the best offensive teams in football. And I think that sets up a unique matchup this weekend because that particular offense has really caused problems for the Cowboys on defense. And it's one of the reasons that Mike McCarthy hired Mike Zimmer to rejoin the organization as a defensive coordinator. He has had success and experience against this. The last three seasons, the Cowboys have won 12 regular season games, but in the playoffs, they've had their season end the last 3 years, twice to San Francisco and once to Green Bay. And Clint Kubiak obviously comes from San Francisco directly, brings that style of offense, which is a lot of pre-snap motion, which the Saints were last in the league using last year. It relies on play action passing, establishing the running game. I mean, we all saw what the 49ers did on Monday night.
Yeah.
They replaced Christian McCaffrey, the best running back in football, with an undrafted free agent making his first NFL start, and he dominated the game. So that's what I think the interesting matchup is. Derek Carr obviously was well protected in the first game. I think he faced the least amount of pressure among starting quarterbacks week one, but the Cowboys are all about creating pressure and mistakes from the quarterback position.
There's so many matchups that are going to be fun to watch in this. You think about just the chess pieces of Zimmer going up against Kubiak. Kubiak, somebody that he retained on his staff originally with the Vikings and then rehired again later. So their history goes back so far. How is that going to play into this game?
Well, it should give both sides some insight into what philosophy and what approach the other will take. Whether that affects the performance of one or the other significantly, I couldn't say, but there's got to be a comfort level on both sides of having a sense of what to expect, even though this is just week two and these teams don't play against each other all that often. So I think that's an interesting thing to see how that element evolves. But certainly Mike Zimmer mentioned how highly he regards Clint Kubiak. As you said, he was on his staff. And a great hire, I think, by Dennis Allen.
It definitely seems like it's worked well so far. The players loved him. The ideas, he's very dry. He doesn't offer a lot in terms of personality, but he stands by his word. He says, we're going to spread the ball around. Everybody's going to get to have a part in this offense. And we saw that in week one. There was so many players that got involved in the different plays. How is that going to create a problem for the Cowboys defensively and trying to key in on one person or another?
Yeah, and Alvin Kamara led a rushing game that had 180 yards. And that's been the weakness of the Cowboys on defense over recent years, is that they don't play the run well. They got run out of the stadium by the Bills, by the 49ers, by the Eagles last year. I think it does increase the challenge when you have a bunch of guys who break the huddle. Even though a play's called, they all know that if they get open, they're going to get the ball in all likelihood. I think it makes everybody play faster, play harder, and it definitely increases the degree of difficulty for the defense. And as you mentioned, there'll be some interesting matchups in this game. The Cowboys have some young players on both sides of the ball, really, for a team that's coming off 3 12-win seasons. I think it's a good approach to have everybody believing that if they do their job and they're open, they have a chance to get the ball.
You mentioned the pressures that Carr didn't face in last week's game, but the Cowboys, 25 quarterback pressure, 6 sacks. I mean, they were coming at the Browns from all different angles, places. Is that something that they're really focused in on this year?
Yeah, it's kind of been what's been their identity on defense in recent years. Under Dan Quinn, they led the NFL in pressures. Micah Parsons individually leads the NFL in pressures since he came into the league 3 years ago. They've led the NFL in takeaways. They've led the NFL in defensive touchdowns. Last year, Deron Bland had 5 pick sixes, an NFL record. He's not even playing now. He's out for the first 4 to 6 weeks of being replaced by a rookie. So that'll be an interesting situation to see if the Saints can capitalize on that matchup. But they are still under Mike Zimmer. While there's more, I think, stress on playing fundamentally sound and maintaining your gap and taking care of your responsibility, Mike Zimmer still wants to create turnovers, and he knows the way to do that is to create pressure on the quarterback and force him into mistakes. And they do that exceptionally well everywhere they play, and particularly in their home opener, in front of 100,000 people, where it's going to be loud. It's going to be challenging for Derek Carr at the line of scrimmage for him to communicate protection changes. And Zimmer is very creative with how he uses his defensive linemen and stunting and all of that. So communication and identifying in pass protection is going to be a critically important part of it for the Saints to execute this week. I mean, you don't get to play the Carolina Panthers every week.
And no offense to the Panthers or the Browns even, but they weren't the most difficult opponent to open things up with and see what you're really working with, but a good confidence booster, I'm sure. Right. Both teams scoring over 30 points, both teams ranking top 5 in total defense. So this is going to be a true test, especially I think for the Saints.
Well, it's interesting that coming out of week 1, the Saints defense and the Cowboys defense, the opposing quarterback in those games had the lowest QBRs in the league after week 1. So that tells you how well they're capable of playing on defense. And I think for the Saints to have success in this game, they've got to create a certain, way the game goes. They've got to control the scoring. The Cowboys have won 16 consecutive home games, and Dak Prescott's been the best home quarterback in all of football since 2022. They average 35 points a game, and they give up like 15 points a game. So they typically win by 20 points at home, as long as they're not in the playoffs. In the playoffs, just the opposite happens. But yeah, I think Dennis Allen will try to control the game offensively with the running game, hold down the score, limit the possessions. And if they don't turn the ball over, they've got a chance to do that. But like I said, that's a difficult thing to manage against the Cowboys because they do create all kinds of pressure, and turnovers are typically the result of that. But if this is a game that both teams score in the 20s, I think that's how the Saints can win. If somebody's going to score 30, it's probably not going to be the kind of game the Saints want to play.
Yeah, that's a lot of the feedback that I've seen from different people previewing this game is, can the Saints score enough points to be able to be in it with the Cowboys? It's going to be interesting looking at the Saints offensive line. That's been a big focus topic of conversation for us throughout the offseason. Only 2 returning starters. And now you have your rookie left tackle, Talia Sequaga, who's dealing with some back tightness, missed practice this week. How big of a concern is that for a team that already is dealing with a young offensive line?
Yeah, obviously you don't want your depth tested on the offensive line of all places, because really nobody has depth in the offensive line. And both of these teams are starting rookie left tackles. Tyler Guyton played every snap last week for the Cowboys, and their center, Cooper Beebe, is another rookie, a 3rd-round pick, and he played all but 1 snap. So both teams have the same sort of challenge, even when they are at full strength on the offensive line, in that they're playing inexperienced players. And in this game, I mean, Guyton went up against the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett, last week, and now he's got to go up against Cam Jordan. And the Saints' young offensive line has to go up against Micah Parsons. And it is always going to be a challenge, even when you have young players and they're at full strength. It's still difficult to manage the game and create. I mean, you watch the Cowboys game, Guyton gets a lot of credit for what he did against Myles Garrett, but the Cowboys really did a great job as a coaching staff, I think. And this is what Clint Kubiak will have to do. If the rookie's out at left tackle, is you gotta manage the protections. You have to have a good scheme. They have to go into this week, and I'm sure they have, thinking, hey, we cannot let Micah Parsons wreck the game, and build your protection scheme that way. Like you watched, there were plays last week when Guyton was matched up against Myles Garrett that their left guard, Tyler Smith, was also blocking on Garrett. And Ezekiel Elliott, the running back, who's great at blitz pickup, there was a 3-on-1 situation many of the times. And I think that's the kind of situation that maybe the Saints will have to, make sure they create to protect against Micah Parsons.
Yeah, Parsons is a name that has come up quite frequently this week in the locker room and from the coaches. On the opposite side, you've been there talking to the Cowboys. What's been names or things that are coming up for them?
Well, I think they're really interested to see if Marshawn Lattimore makes it to the game. He's got an injury, as you know, that's kept him out of a few practices here, and he's missed a lot of games in recent years. Like he's missed 17 of his last 35 possible starts. We were talking to CeeDee Lamb yesterday about that potential matchup. And one of the interesting things he said to me was he does not see Marshawn Lattimore going in the slot. And, CeeDee Lamb is used in the slot a lot, and it's very productive from that position. He's difficult to cover when he has a two-way go like he does in the slot. And so it sounds like if the Cowboys want to avoid that matchup, they can simply put him in the slot and he won't be defended by Lattimore or covered by Lattimore if Marshawn even makes it to the game. So that's certainly one. Cam Jordan, obviously another, player that they concern themselves with quite a bit. They feel offensively like they did not play that well, even though, like you said, they scored 33 points and they won the kind of game they've typically lost on the road against a playoff opponent, tough physical type of team. So winning the game meant a lot to them psychologically, I think. And it's really imperative that they get off to a fast start because the coaching staff is on the last year of their, much like Dennis Allen's situation in New Orleans. Both teams really need to, win games early on. So I think the Cowboys want to try and get the offense, playing to its standard for 4 quarters because they didn't do that last week. They had a chance to put the game away earlier than they really did.
Yeah, Dak said that it was a sloppy second half for him. And that makes me nervous that he feels like he's out to prove that he can sustain that for 4 quarters. He's from Louisiana. He's playing his hometown team here. I know there's been some banter back and forth between him and some of his friends. So how much does that motivate him coming into this one?
Oh, I think there's a number of guys on this roster who have connections to Louisiana. Brandon Cooks is playing his 150th game, and he was a former number 1 draft pick of the Saints. So he has a lot of additional incentive. I don't know how much it crosses their mind once the game gets played. Probably not at all. But going into it, there's, like you said, there's certainly been some back and forth with Dak. And I mean, what a great story he is as a 4th round pick who takes over for, an injured Tony Romo his rookie season, where he probably didn't expect to even get in a uniform on game day and leads the Cowboys to a 13-3 season. And he's the starting quarterback, now going into his 9th year, just signed the richest contract in NFL history. A kid who, like you said, from Louisiana. He talked this week about, how he started in playing football with his brothers in a trailer park. And he was the youngest one out there and held his own. So there are a lot of great stories and a lot of interesting connections. And it gets talked about before the game, during the game. It probably doesn't matter. But Dak did say there's been some back and forth texting with some of his friends who grew up in Louisiana as Saints fans, whereas he grew up in, I think is it Houghton, Louisiana, or that's the high school he went to. And he was always a Cowboys fan. So he sent back, some comments. They said, "Who dat?" He said, "Dak, dat." And, the middle finger emoji and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, you got to keep it fun going into this weekend. It's just going to be such an interesting game. And you've mentioned the way it starts is going to be so important. The Saints played extremely well all 3 phases, but I do think that special teams could play a factor in this one as well. And both of the kickers in this game have shown the ability to kick from range. You have Brandon Aubrey with the Cowboys and then Blake Grupe here with the Saints.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about what an amazing story Dak Prescott is. Well, Brandon Aubrey may be even more amazing, the Cowboys kicker who comes into the league as a free agent from the USFL, like Kevontae Turpin, who had a punt return for a touchdown last week. I mean, the Cowboys paid nothing to get these players, didn't cost them a draft pick, and they become Pro Bowl level players. And Aubrey last week makes a 66-yard field goal at the end of the first half that was negated by a delay of game penalty on the Cowboys. And even then, on the road, the Cowboys coaches thought about trying a 71-yard field goal. Ultimately, once the Browns put a returner back there was too much risk, and so they decided not to do it and they punted. But that's the kind of confidence that they have in Aubrey, and that's an outdoor game where there's some wind. So
right.
You can imagine here once they get across midfield, they start thinking about, if we don't get the first down, do we kick a field goal here? I mean, they're all in on Brandon Aubrey. It's a unique weapon to have, and the Saints know that as well.
Yeah, Groupie had a 57-yarder, so not quite as long, but he's got a leg for a little guy as well. So that's there again. So many fun matchups to watch.
Well, I think in week 1, NFL kickers didn't miss from 50 and beyond. I think they were like 21 for 21. I mean, it's just crazy. How the game has gone in that aspect.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, people are just going to continue to get better and work on things and find things that they can do to improve themselves. Dak mentioned this week too, once he signed that contract, that obviously the number one goal for him is the Super Bowl, and it's coming through here in New Orleans this year. So the players here have been talking about it a lot as well. How close do you think the Cowboys are to that?
I don't know. I mean, I think they're a little frustrated. Everybody was talking to the most prominent players, Dak and CD, DeMarcus Lawrence, about how dominant they've been at home, but but it's really meaningless, and they know it. It doesn't. Who cares that you won 16 straight regular season games? Because the goal in all of that is to create an advantage at home by playing in the playoffs. And they lost to the 49ers 3 years ago. They didn't ever lead in that game at home. And they lost to the Packers last year. They never led in that game at home when they were 8-0, at home, the only undefeated team in football. So I think they do want to go out and reestablish that. And at the same time, these guys are well aware, because of what's happened in the postseason, that they could go 17-0 in the regular season, and everybody would be sitting here the first week of the playoffs going, so what? So what? Go prove it. They don't even trust this team at home in the playoffs. So, and understandably so. And they recognize that, hey, there's going to be doubt and ridicule and criticism until they go out and win playoff games on a consistent basis at home. And yeah, I'm sure they want to finish their season in New Orleans.
Yeah. For New Orleans, what would a win mean and say to maybe the league about this team?
Yeah, well, I think it would be really meaningful, because I don't think in recent years the Saints have a great record against opponents with a winning record at the time they play them. And so that would be something for, if you come in and win in Dallas and become the first team in a regular season to do so, I think you're going to get a lot of credibility. You're going to get a lot of internal buy-in. And that's always important to coaches. I mean, Mike Zimmer talked about that last week, being the defensive coordinator here for the first time with this collection of players that have had quite a bit of success in the regular season on that side of the ball. And hey, if you go out there and play lousy, all of a sudden there's all kinds of doubt in your own locker room that you're trying to overcome. So yeah, I think it would be a huge infusion of confidence for the Saints if they were able to come in here and win a game at Dallas.
Taking a little bit, taking a step back a little bit in the NFC South, who do you think is the biggest threat to the Saints? Because currently we're on top. I know it's crazy week 1, but
I would say Tampa Bay probably is a team that they need to be the most concerned about. I mean, the Panthers don't look like they're any more competitive under Dave Canales than they have in recent years. But Baker Mayfield seems to have done a good job of winning confidence in the locker room, executing the scheme with Leon Cohen's a new defensive or a new offensive coordinator. They got playmakers, obviously, on the offensive side of the ball, and they've got some significant injuries in their secondary right now in defense. So they're in jeopardy the next few weeks. So this might be an opportunity for the Saints, if they can win, to establish some superiority early on in that division, which could carry them a long way ultimately.
You mentioned injuries earlier when you were talking about Marshawn Lattimore, but on the Cowboys side, I know it's been tight end Jake Ferguson that's been out. How big is that in what they do schematically, or anybody else that you're kind of watching going into this one?
Yeah, he thought he tore his ACL in the first game, and he left the field, and he was evaluated the next day with an MRI, which revealed an MCL injury and a bone bruise. So he's been out at practice working with the ready to play group, the rehab group, has not been in practice, but Mike McCarthy has indicated he's not ruling him out. He's getting close. Are they willing to risk him in a game on artificial turf early in the season? Remains to be seen, I think, but he definitely is somebody that Dak Prescott has a lot of confidence in. In fact, over time, including the playoffs, Dak's got 32 touchdown passes to tight ends. Only Patrick Mahomes has more in that space of time. And, he has Travis Kelce, arguably the best tight end in football. So, yeah, it's a position that Dak relies a lot on. If he can't go, it'll be Luke Schoonmaker, who they drafted in the second round out of Michigan last year. Not nearly the same receiving threat, a capable blocker, but they'll lose a dynamic player if they don't have Jake Ferguson.
Man, I can't wait for this one. So tell me a story from you covering the Saints, like one of the best ones.
One of the best stories about covering the Saints. Well, I covered their Super Bowl win. I was down there all the time during the Sean Payton, Drew Brees period of time. And it was always fun to, I guess my funniest story, and it's been important to me, was so Sean Payton knows that I'm a country music fan. And so I'm sitting here in this office where I am right now. One day they're at training camp, Millsaps College, and I get a phone call, and I see on my phone it's Sean Payton, so I answer, and he says, "Hey, I just wanted to check in. I want to let you know we had a new punt returner in town today, and in fact, let me just put him on." And he puts on Kenny Chesney. Chesney, his buddy Chesney, showed up at camp, and they put him in a helmet and let him catch some punts. And because he knew I was a big Kenny Chesney country music fan, Sean had him call me. And so that started a really great relationship between me and Kenny Chesney. I've been to a bunch of his shows and backstage. And like I said, when I went to a Saints game, covered a Saints game one time late into the night, because they're always on Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football. And the night before the game, I went out with Kenny and Grace Potter, and we were at Lucy's across the street from my hotel, and I bought drinks. And so I'm leaving, and Kenny opens the door to the SUV. They had like 5 SUVs lined up, like he's a presidential candidate or something. All the lights are flashing. And he says, "Get in." And, he's in there. Grace Potter's in there. I'm like, I can't. I got to cover the game early. I got an early call tomorrow morning. He's like, "Just get in." I heard never go to the second location. So I didn't go, much to my eternal regret.
Oh, man.
I should have just toughed it out the next day, but I should have gone out. How many times you get to go out with Grace Potter and Kenny Chesney and a bunch of musicians when you're the kind of music fan that I am?
Wow, the self-control there. Good for you.
Job first.
There you go. I love it. How are you enjoying being there in Dallas and covering specifically the Cowboys now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been here for 32 consecutive years. Came here to cover the Cowboys as a newspaper guy a long time ago.
Yeah.
And stayed here because, well, actually contractually ESPN required that I live in Dallas because they wanted me to cover the Cowboys on television. And I always tell people, they're like surprised I live here. And I'm like, well, it's a, central location, so you can fly anywhere, in half the time. It's an American Airlines hub. There's a lot of flight options. And I got Jerry Jones's football circus in my backyard. So Why would this not be the place to be? So, yeah, it's been great. They're a fun team to cover. If it weren't for the fascination with them, I'm sure I never would have even had a TV career. But yeah, and it's a good group of players for the most part. I mean, I had the privilege of covering the teams in the 90s when they won, 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. So yeah, I've been around a long time. I've covered a lot of Hall of Famers, a lot of great games. It's been my privilege, really. I mean, so many times you see on Twitter the video anniversary of some historic game in the NFL, and I'm like, I covered that game. I was there, So it's never lost on me how fortunate I am to do what I and you do, and hope you have many of the same experiences I've been able to enjoy along the way.
Yeah, we're very lucky in the fact that there are a lot of fans out there that just love this sport and eat up all of the content and we get to be here to cover it for them. And I really appreciate the time you spent this morning talking to me about the matchup and just about your career in general. It was awesome to get to meet you. You too, Erin. I look forward to maybe seeing you at the game on Sunday. Sounds good. Thanks for doing this with me. I appreciate the time. Appreciate Ed and all of you for tuning in and listening to the podcast today. As always, you can find everything you missed this week on NewOrleansSaints.com and tune in there Sunday, 11 o'clock for our pregame show. We'll be back there with the postgame show. Scott Shanley and I will break down everything we saw in Sunday's game. It should be a good one this weekend, Saints fans. So let's go Saints and get that win.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints Podcast.